the EV World News. We talk about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock market. I'm here with our founder and editor, Bill Moore. How's it going, Bill?
Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in Nebraska, and I'm got up on the right side of the bed today.
That's good. That's good. We like that. We've got a number of interesting articles to get through today. One I wanted to cover first. I didn't really discuss it. St- Starters. Tesla Model Y has broken the record in Denmark for the most sales ever in a year, and there's still 2 more months to go.
Yeah,
And it's likely that the Tesla Model Y will end the year as the best-selling car on the planet.
yes,
And
yeah,
I find that really fascinating because
oh,
the Y
absolutely.
hasn't been out for very long. Tesla is not a very old car maker, and it's an electric vehicle. And it's really quite fascinating that this is, where things are going
Yeah,
in the space.
yeah,
And I love
it
seeing
is.
it. And, it's
I'm
just
very,
a
I am
thing.
very happy. It only took me 25 years to get to this point.
It's really hard to fathom sometimes. I tell people that you started EV World in 1998,
98.
that because, when I look back at what were really there for electric vehicles, you basically had some golf carts and you had some buses.
Well, it was a little more than that. I mean, you had to go to California to get basically a real car. Other than that, yes, it was golf carts and the odd bus here and there. So,
But was there an actual all-electric vehicle? I mean, I know we had
oh
hybrids.
yeah, yeah, yeah. California mandate. Every one of the car makers had to have a functioning four-wheel all-electric drive vehicle, and so Toyota had the Rav4. Nissan had their let's see, what was a little sort of a city car. Oh God, name skips me at the moment.
Like the cheaper than the Leaf?
Oh, it wasn't even no close. It wouldn't even look if it was strictly God, I can't think of the name right now. But anyway, so they had that, but then they also later came up with I guess what we would call an SUV version.
Hmm.
It's called the Ultima or something like that. Ultra.
Okay.
But then again, the big one obviously was General Motors and the EV1 and Honda and the EV Plus. Chrysler had an electric minivan. Ford had the Ford Ranger EV. So every
All
one of
this
the
back in the
major car
90s.
makers had something in the works that you could lease. You couldn't buy them initially, but you could lease them.
Well, I learned something today. I didn't know all that. That's certain, but I just find this
Wisdom
really
with age.
right, right. I just find it really fascinating that um, you know, this is going on. And it's also interesting too that in a country like Denmark, it's a northern climate. So a lot of people say, well, the EVs aren't going to work where it's cold and there's snow.
Yeah.
And yet we see that the five Nordic countries are the biggest adopters of EVs in the world so far.
You know
And
who
it's
was the leader originally back in the day? Was
who's that?
actually Norway. They were producing electric cars, and they were doing it at a rate that interested Ford Motor Company. So Ford Motor Company came along, and besides, remember I mentioned the Ford Ranger, they
Hmm.
also started an all-electric vision division called Think, and that they had that very first car that they rolled out was a Norwegian built again 2-seat city car called the Think, and the Think City. They came up later with some other types of a sort of a vehicle that would be ideal for doing automated shuttle service and things like that based on that platform. But they were the leaders. I've been thinking, why? What's happened with that? And of course, what they've done is they've now beginning to focus, interestingly, on aviation and flight. Whereas the electric car side of things have been largely taken over by Volvo and Polestar, which are Swedish companies.
Right. Right. That's nice. That's nice. So let's go on and let's talk a little bit about what Mazda's doing. Now, Mazda
Yeah.
hasn't taken the same approach to EVs. Like with most companies, when they make an EV, the first noticeable thing when you test drive is how quick it is. Okay.
Right.
Mazda's taken the other approach, and they've tried to see how slow they can make an EV. And yeah, it was
Wow.
yeah, one of the few negative car reviews I've ever seen, Forest Auto Reviews do
That,
was
yeah,
on the MX-30, and he was talking about, "This has gotta be the slowest EV ever
yeah,
made."
yeah, that was really an engineering and marketing disaster that I don't even think they sell them here in the States anymore. That was just it just
No,
did
it
not
is,
go
it
anywhere.
is. It's on my 10 cheapest EV list for 2024.
Yeah.
So we haven't released that video yet, but we're gonna release it in the next few days.
Okay.
And it's still on the list because I was like, do we want to talk about the 0 to 60 in
Yeah.
9.5 seconds?
Yeah.
So our one today, we're talking a little about Mazda's rotary powertrain that
Yeah. No,
they use.
yeah, this is interesting because obviously Mazda led with introducing the only car maker that I'm aware of that ever introduced the Wankel engine. And if you're familiar with the Wankel engine, basically it was invented in Germany just before Hitler came to power. Unfortunately, I think it was 1929 by a German engineer. And the idea is that instead of having pistons going up and down, you had this sort of elliptical triangle spinning around inside, and it was I don't know the best way. It was just simpler in design. And so Mazda introduced it, and wow, what was that back in the 70s or so, something like that? They introduced it. Never really got off, to any kind of a serious. I mean, there's some people that really liked it, but never kind of made any traction. Certainly never replaced the internal combustion, piston banger. But
Yeah,
now it appears that they're bringing it back in the form of the best I can describe it is as an electric car generator. We talked a couple of days ago about the Ram, right? The Ram
mhm,
1500.
yes,
Um, and that, of course, what they're doing is they're using a V6 piston banger to drive a generator to provide the power for the battery and for the electric traction motors. So there's no mechanical connection between the ICE engine and the drivetrain.
right.
So Mazda appears to be doing something similar, except instead of using a four banger, they're using the rotary engine, which the only advantage that I can see of doing that is that the thing about the rotary engine is it can burn multiple types of fuel. So if you want to run gasoline through it, you can. If you want to run diesel, you can. If you want to run biofuels through it, you can. And most importantly, if you want to run hydrogen through it, you can. And I think, and so I think what they're hoping, I mean, in their press release, what there was of it, basically says, that you can feel comfortable driving on a zero carbon or net zero carbon fuel in your electric car, which apparently they're thinking of putting this in the next generation Miata. Um, so I got to looking and doing a little research just before we went on air and thinking, so why didn't the Mazda rotary engine ever take off? Well, because the main reason because it was a polluting engine because you had a low efficiency compared to more advanced diesels and things like that. So you had a lower efficiency and you had a greater problem with pollution coming out of it. So I'm guessing they're thinking that we'll make this a generator for the electric drive system on the car. And then we'll encourage people, hey, you can put whatever kind of fuel you want in this thing, particularly encouraging the hydrogen side of it. Put hydrogen in it, and you've got now a car where instead of having to rely on a power plant, 50 miles away burning coal or whatever, you can be using green generated hydrogen to, generate your electricity. And that's a much cleaner approach. I am not an engineer or scientist, so I can't weigh in on the merits of that argument, but it's certainly worth making. So
Yeah,
much luck to them. Let's see what the market says.
I know in fighter aircraft from World War II, the most successful fighter aircraft used rotary engines. But a lot of it was because they weren't. So the two most successful fighter aircraft of World War II would be the P-47 Thunderbolt and the Focke-Wulf 190, and they both
Well,
had
those were
rotary
internal
engines.
combustion engines.
They
Yeah,
were.
those.
I get that, but
Well,
for some
there's
reason
a
they were
Yeah,
able to
there's a
take a lot of
difference between,
damage.
yeah, we're not talking about rotary in the sense of a P-47 Pratt and Whitney or a
Hmm.
Mercedes, engine in a Focke-Wulf 190. What we're talking about is an engine where you've got this lobe system where this thing spins, unlike the fighter engines, which had pistons radiating out of that central shaft. Um, so it's a different technology that we're talking about here.
Okay.
Those rotary engines actually got their start in essentially World War One, where when you started the engine,
Mhm.
you actually spun the whole thing, not just the prop, but the
Right.
engine also spun in those. But they were still piston engines. They were still pumping back and forth. They just did it in a circle. Whereas the Mazda Wankel engine is a completely different concept.
Nice. Nice. It's interesting too. And I've told you a little bit about this Exceeder fleet, Derrick Automotive bringing this Proteus generator to market next year.
Uh-huh.
And it's similar type technology in that they're using a miniaturized fuel-based generator that's powering a couple of electric batteries. But what it achieves is it achieves greater efficiency from the fuel that's added, whether it be because they're designing it that it can run on propane, kerosene, diesel,
Yeah.
gas. But when it's combined with a diesel engine, for instance, it gives double the horsepower.
Hmm.
And so it produces tremendous capacity for torque and horsepower and things like that. And massive. They're thinking they can make a hybrid vehicle or a hybrid car that could get almost 200 miles per gallon
Hmm.
based on the efficiency of what it takes with fuels. But this is essentially, all these technologies are all kind of doing that same thing.
Yeah.
It's very similar. What's interesting is, so they're looking at putting this rotary engine on the MX-5 on the Miata, and they're talking about it generating like 170 horsepower and doing 0 to 60 in 9 seconds. Now
Yeah.
the Miata is a sporty looking car, but it's not going to be something that's going to be overly quick.
Well,
That's
yeah, I think they would probably do well to. They are aligned with Ford, or weren't they? Are they still
I don't know.
aligned with Ford? But I think they would do well to look for some partnerships a little wider afield to get them some.
Yeah. Well, they're talking
Uh,
about the Miata having a top speed of 87. I mean, you might do more than that on I-80 around here. You get out to western Nebraska and you
Hey,
get
it's a
next
yeah,
state.
it's a it's an attempt to come up with
Yeah.
something different, something obviously better than the what was the X330 or whatever it was.
Yep. And I had one other thing before we get into our main topics, real quick, is that for a first in 2024, U.S. solar will generate 15% more electricity than hydropower. And
Yeah,
this
yeah,
includes both solar farms and, rooftop solar is exceeding what people get from dams and stuff. Because originally, when people really started doing much with electricity, hydropower was basically the first source. You see all these pictures of like old logging mills. You go to a
yeah,
town near a river and you look, and the pictures of the old waterfront all show all the things twirling to make power. And,
Well, water powered grain and sawmills. I mean, I'm here in Papillion. You know Papillion Creek.
mhm,
If you know where the park is on Lincoln Drive, just next to that, right there at the creek, there was a grist mill, and
mhm.
that grist mill was driven by the water flowing through Papillion Creek. So they
That
were
wasn't
this.
much.
Pardon?
That wasn't much.
Well, yeah, it's surprising they did it. I think they had probably a dam behind that, and then they could use the water was
Okay,
coming through the dam rather than
like a control.
depending on sort of annual flow type of thing. But I've gone down there and I actually built a 3D model in virtual reality 3D model of the grist mill, and so I'm fairly familiar. So that's where they got their power from. Here in the Papillion area to run the grist mill, not to generate electricity. That would eventually, come from the Omaha power system.
Great.
But yeah, so now what's interesting is you're finding a trend where, for example, out in Washington State, in particular, they are knocking down some of those dams and trying to restore the waterways out there and the flow of salmon spawning and things of that nature. So some of those big dams, well, not big in the sense of Hoover or anything, but some of those smaller dams generating, local indigenous power are being knocked down and the watershed being restored.
Yeah, I've got something. This article's kind of funny, and this is our main one for today from Study Finds. EV drivers aren't helping the environment because they don't drive enough. And this is
Yeah.
kind of funny. It's like that's one of the things is trying to reduce the environmental impact of cars. But fossil fuels are out, electricity's in, but the people who actually buy electric vehicles don't really drive that much. And
Here,
you know, the
I'm there. I'm in there.
the assumptions are that EV owners would drive the same as people who own gas vehicles, and that would increase the savings. But in reality, what is it? They drive 5,000 miles less
Yeah,
per
roughly
year.
5,000 miles less. Yeah.
Yeah, so let me see. Um, Battery EVs travel about 4,500 miles fewer per year. That's a
Yeah.
difference of EVs drive 7,100 miles per year, and gas-powered cars about 11,600 miles per year. And that's interesting, to see, but that's more of a well, there's two things here. So one, if I were, say, a traveling medical rep or something like that, of course, that'd be a commercially owned car. But if I were driving hundreds of miles every day going around the Midwest to visit hospitals and things like that, I would probably not drive an electric car at the moment just because of range. It'd be possible to do, but it would be a little bit more of a challenge. So those people who are driving those longer distances are typically driving, they're driving gas-powered cars, whereas EVs are still pictured as being a commuter vehicle, people just driving them back and forth to work.
Yeah.
And it could be that a lot of families that own, say, an EV and one gas vehicle are putting more miles on the gas vehicle, when they're using it for the longer trips, and the other one they're
Yeah.
driving mainly
Well,
on the shorter
yeah,
trips.
I mean, I can speak from experience on this thing. Of course, as we were talking before we went live, a fair number of those people that are buying, electric cars quote retirees, like me. And I work from home. My commute was about 12 miles over and back to a data company. And I don't have to make that commute anymore, right? I got
Right.
to 65, and of course, they retired me earlier than that, but we won't touch on that topic. But anyway, so I work from home. I'm retired. My wife retired a couple of years ago from her job at a local Omaha corporation. So she doesn't commute anymore. So we boomers are in a position where we don't have to daily commute. And I mean, it'd be interesting to find out what the age ranges, or are we all boomers that are buying these cars, or is there, slanted more towards boomers as opposed to, millennials or Gen X or Gen Z or whatever. Um, so there's that. Then there's just the whole, who wants to go into the office anymore?
Right.
They're
Right.
just,
And that
that's,
that may be part of it too. People
yeah,
working from home are the ones that have bought EVs. And I know most people I know that or at least around here, that drive electric vehicles, they're almost all in IT. They don't necessarily have to go
yeah,
into the office, so that they're
yeah,
probably not really driving that much because they're not commuting anymore.
right.
And so there definitely is,
And
some of
then
that
you've
is
got,
part of it.
if you go shopping, you see that about, I don't know, I should, about maybe 25% of the people in the store doing going to grocery, Target or wherever, are pickers, right? Because
That's true.
what they're doing is they're going around, and somebody has, gone onto their laptop or onto their phone and ordered groceries. And so the store now has people running around and, picking items for them that are either they deliver, many of those will just be, in fact, my wife said last week, why didn't we sign up for that? Because she doesn't like shopping, going grocery shopping, particularly on her own. So you find that we're beginning. It'd be interesting to see what the shift has been to people who are ordering, right,
Right.
things, and then you've got, all of. I would suspect we've got FedEx and Amazon trucks go through here several times a day down my street, where people are
Mhm.
ordering stuff, goods online, so they don't have to go off and search for things. They just simply go online and order it. So I think we got a convergence of a lot of different factors that are driving that trend to, if you own an electric car, why do you need to drive it as much? I don't. I think I drive my car maybe 3 or 4 times a week, if that. So and we recently took this summer, we took a trip over to Des Moines to see friends. We took the Prius, but that's the only trip that of any distance that the car has done. Every now and then, my wife, for some curious reason, doesn't like to drive my Fiat, which I love, but she
Hmm.
prefers her Prius because she's driven it for 20 years. Well, not say that many years, will be 15 years. So, that's what she drives when she goes out, by herself to, do her shopping for either groceries, or she's into miniatures. So she goes and visits hobby stores and things
Nice.
like that. So I think there's a lot of things here. Now, the question is, though, if we're not driving as many miles, we were told here, earlier this summer that the only way an electric car can pay for all of the extra pollution that it generates being produced is that it has to be driven a little longer and more, right? More miles. So, in effect, it's going to take longer for that car to offset its original production pollution. Instead of the average sort of 12,000 miles, it'll, annually that we drive, we're only driving 7 of that or 8 of that. Is it going to take longer? Probably yes. The question, though, is that just because the car takes longer to drive, that car's going to be around, longer in longer circulation. So if I think
Right.
it'll pay for itself, it'll just take, instead of taking 6 or 7 years, whatever it is, it'll take 8 or 9 years.
So I had a couple other little things to kind of cover because that one was kind of a we want to watch the world burn kind of article. This next one kind of is too. This one is kind of interesting because I've been praising the Saudis for bringing Lucid into manufacturing in the
Yeah,
kingdom.
Lucid.
And
Yeah.
then here, Bloomberg, Saudis find a bottomless money pit in Lucid. Well, I think the Saudis know what they're getting into
Oh,
by
yeah.
bringing this in because Lucid's definitely a super or I shouldn't say super luxury. It's a very luxury upscale
Yeah.
electric vehicle. And they've really managed to build something nicer than Mercedes or Lexus
Oh, yeah.
or
Yeah.
something like that, and it's at I mean, some of their cars have a 500-mile range. I
Yeah.
mean, they really if you really want performance in an EV, Lucid is producing it in their cars. My argument has been, why did they only make cars? And they're going to switch to making crossovers soon, but, the Saudis own $5.4 billion worth of Lucid. Well, I don't know that that's really,
Yeah.
I,
They
I
didn't
I
give a
think they like that.
percentage, huh?
They own a fairly big part of it. Now, what's interesting is they're trying to show what they've lost as part of investing in Lucid. They don't really get into the production. Lucid expects to manufacture up to 8,500 cars this year. Previous expectations were 10,000. Now, they laid off 18% of their workforce. But one
Now,
thing
what
is,
is that 8,000 in the facility in Saudi Arabia, or is that still
no,
the
that's here in the US. So
U.S.?
they haven't started producing in Saudi. This is for 2023. They can't increase factory output or hike prices because there isn't sufficient demand for the single model it produces, a luxury sedan that costs more than 100,000. They've launched a $77,000 version, and let's see, the Gravity SUV production won't begin until next year. It is a tough space, but I really feel that
Yeah.
the Saudis are going to prop this up. They have a commitment to buy up to 100,000 Lucids for over the next 10 years. So that's 10,000 a year. So that's more than taking its domestic auto production here in the US
Yeah.
and producing it there. So I think that's a great future for them. And I think that unfortunately the way the EV industry is a lot of businesses fragile. So they're trying to do this at a time when interest rates are high, but a lucid buyer is very likely to pay cash. Okay, unlike,
Yeah.
normal, auto buyers, but still, it's a challenge when every aspect of the business probably is still affected by interest rates in some method. So,
Yeah. I think, there, if they, if and when they get production in, scaled up and, having cars rolling out the door, there in Saudi Arabia, then I don't see just the Middle East as their market. They've got a whole African continent off to their west, and then they've got the Indian subcontinent with the world's largest population, there to their east. So I think they're sort of thinking maybe strategic. Of course, then a lot of those cars could end up being, shipped up the Red Sea and through the Suez, and sold in Europe. So I think they got a pretty good potential market for that car. Um, so we'll see how they do. Yeah, I agree. They need some more models in there. I just wish somebody would get serious and give the Chinese some competition on smaller, more affordable cars.
well,
You know,
Tesla just, announced the
yeah,
$27,000 Model 2 they're gonna start producing in Berlin, Germany.
yeah,
And that's, when that comes to the US, if it's at the same price point,
yeah.
you start talking about after the federal rebate, you start talking about a $20,000 Tesla. Who knows what it's gonna
That's
look
almost
like?
affordable.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's getting ridiculously cheap. I mean, that's getting into, I was talking about how it would be good in a lot of parts of the United States if a lot of people were driving something like the Archimoto three-wheeler,
Yeah,
because it's essentially like a bike, but it's a little bit safer. It takes up a little bit of a slightly
yeah,
larger footprint, and I don't think you're going to have the same issues with people pulling out in traffic in front of it, because you're going to be like looking at this, it's like, what's that weird thing coming down the
yeah,
road? You're going to see
yeah.
there's something, whereas
Uh,
motorcycles and bicycles and stuff like that, people just don't always see them or pay attention, or you've got, I think there's a very large percentage of the population is drunk or high all the time when they're driving, and you just
ouch.
really don't know. I don't know if we see it as much here in Nebraska, but when I've been in other cities, I've I used to live in a big city, and I used to estimate that at any given time 20% of the drivers on the road might be drunk or high. And when I say that, a lot of that's prescription drugs.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's not necessarily that they're smoking weed or
all right.
whatever. It may just be all their
We're on
painkillers or
anxiety
whatever.
medicine.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. We got one last thing to get through, and this is about what's going on with fossil fuel companies. So fossil fuel companies can't leave resources stranded, and,
Oh,
and
this is
this
a
is
huge topic.
mhm,
This is a huge topic.
yes. And anyways, even as climate advocates call for eliminating fossil fuels, companies continue to launch major production plans.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
the government,
I posted several stories about in this thread this morning.
yeah, so a new $8 billion project on Alaska's North Slope expected to yield 600 million barrels of
Yeah.
oil over the next 30 years. ExxonMobil announced a $60 billion deal to acquire oil producer Pioneer Natural Resources that would double its production in the Permian Basin to 1.3 million barrels of oil and gas per day. It's interesting kind of to,
Well, and of course, the gist of the article basically is they can't leave those things stranded because of the economic consequences that it would cause. Now, I don't know why they're not counting the environmental geopolitical costs that happen in this, but they're talking, about how dependent, though, obviously the world is on that resource, and if you just cut that resource off, then you send the global economy into a real tailspin. But I don't think the one thing that they haven't talked about it that I at least didn't see in my cursory reading of it is that one of the reasons they can't leave these things stranded is because they took out their loans based on the collateral of what those fields will produce.
right,
So if you've said I've got an oil field here, and our geologists say that it's good for 80 million barrels over the next 10 years, we want X number of dollars so that we can exploit that resource. And so the bank loans you all this money based on the fact that you're going to be pumping that resource out, and they're going to get their cut of it. But then if you decide that, well, we're going to go green and we're going to shift our resources to solar and to wind and to geothermal and to offshore tidal energy and things like that, who's going to repay that loan? How are they going to repay that loan?
it's,
Um,
it's an interesting concept. I do know that it's a lot harder in the oil field business to get any kind of finance.
yeah,
So that's changed quite a bit.
yeah,
And one of the things too, generally, if you invest money in oil fields, they usually expect the oil field to have a useful payback of only like 5 or 6 years.
yeah. And so
So
they have to. It's just it's incumbent upon them to pull that resource out of there just so that they can meet their financial obligations. And then the article points out about investors are gonna sue you to the end of the earth because we put our money into this and now you're gonna do this and we can't. You're not gonna pay us back. And so yeah, it's a real. it's a conundrum that I don't know why anybody would want to invest in those fields, but hey, they've been lucrative, since the days of Standard Oil. So
It's interesting. A lot of countries offer treaties to encourage foreign investment, and those investors could demand arbitration if the treaties are violated.
mhm.
The
Yep,
arbitration could lead to government liabilities up to 340 billion for oil and
yep,
gas projects
yep.
worldwide. And that's not counting coal mining
Oh
and
yeah,
other infrastructure. It's interesting. The estimation is if we stop coal mining by 2050, then we will have used up potentially 10% of all available coal resources. There'll
yeah,
still be 90% in the ground,
yep.
which that's
Which
doesn't seem to be any
which
shortage of coal.
there's yeah. How in the world can we if we've already got, we're already going to shoot past the 2 degree centigrade mark. We're already blowing past the 1.5, the 1.5 centigrade or Celsius mark, on climate, on global climate. In fact, several articles I posted here within the last 24 hours says that the past year, 12 months,
Mhm,
are the warmest on record, since we've been keeping records, which is what, 150, 180 years, something like that.
mhm.
Um, so we're headed to some serious climatic issues, and at the same time, we got this catch 22. We need the energy, but we can't really afford to pull it out of the ground because of the consequences. So drive electric, people.
You
Hey,
know,
and the other part of the fewer miles, because now you get this spate of articles that are saying, well, the problem with electric cars is their tires shred, and the pollution from the toxic pollution off their tires because they're heavier. Well, but we're driving fewer miles, so we're generating less tire pollution. So it's a good thing that we're not driving as many miles. So and also because we're not driving as many miles, we're not making as much demand on the grid. So we're not
right.
going to crash the grid. So there's a lot of positive things about not driving as many miles in an EV.
Yeah, it is interesting that there's people have all of these arguments as to God knows what, how the EVs aren't going to do something. And it's like, your argument really doesn't hold water,
Yeah,
and it's interesting, and usually it's some talking point. But you and I have the benefit of we see a lot of news. We see what a lot of the
yeah.
innovations people have come up with to solve a lot of the relevant issues and where these are coming from. And people only want to report on, what is the most sensational.
Be honest, we all have an agenda.
It's
You
true.
know, my
There's
agenda's been for 25 years has been to, evangelize electric vehicle technology because I think it's just a better solution.
Mhm.
Um, but then I've also been really pushing hard. In fact, my first EVs were electric bikes, and it's still my favorite EV is an electric bike. But you everybody's got an agenda, particularly if your income is coming from a one of the more powerful industries in the world. You're
Yeah.
going to do everything you can to defend it.
No, I get it. I get it. Anyways, Bill, good show today. We went almost 40 minutes,
I
so
know.
let's move
Wow.
on.
Stop making me talk so much. It's your
Yeah.
fault.
Anyways, folks, thanks for tuning in today.